Okay, I think we are recording. I can edit that out. All right. Well, welcome everyone to our NACSW workshop, Homelessness Among Families and the Permanent Supportive Housing Model. We're glad to be here with you. My name is Katie Thompson, and I'm going to be serving as the moderator for our conversation today. I serve as the Program Director of Shared Justice, which is an initiative of the Center for Public Justice. CPJ is a Christian, nonpartisan public policy and civic education organization based in Washington, D.C. And over the last year, I've had the privilege of overseeing the Hatfield Prize, which is an annual research award made to student-faculty pairs at Christian colleges and universities. And that's what's bringing us here today. Over the last year, I've had the opportunity to work with a research team at Azusa Pacific University as they explored the issue of chronic family homelessness in the Los Angeles area. Daniel Montoya and Dr. Anupama Jacobs' research was just released by the Center for Public Justice, and we're here to discuss the research in more depth, along with Sans Rojas of the Baltimore-based Marian House. So I am going to briefly introduce our presenters before we get started. First, Dr. Anupama Jacob is an associate professor in the Azusa Pacific University's Bachelor of Social Work program, and she's APU's interim director of undergraduate research, or was the APU interim director of undergraduate research last fall. Jacob earned a PhD in social welfare from the University of California, Berkeley, and her research interests center on issues related to poverty and inequality, particularly in the United States. Daniel Montoya will graduate in December 2020 with a Bachelor's of Social Work from Azusa Pacific University in the city of Azusa, California. Montoya was the vice president of the Latin American Student Association for the 2019-2020 academic year, and he was also an intern serving individuals with chronic homelessness and severe mental illness. Montoya also provides mentorship as a TRIO Upward Bound Academy leader to first-generation high school students. And lastly, Sans Rojas is the Director of Grants and Administrative Operations at Marian House, a Baltimore-based transitional and permanent supportive housing program serving women and children experiencing homelessness, trauma, and addiction. She received her BSW from Azusa Pacific University in Azusa, California, and her MSW from the University of Maryland in Baltimore. Her professional background is in grant writing, communications, advocacy, and community partnerships, and she serves on the board of Youth with a Mission and is engaged in multiple coalitions, including the National Coalition for Homelessness Solutions, Greater Baltimore Grassroots Criminal Justice Network, and the Women's Coalition of Maryland. So as I mentioned today, I am going to serve as our moderator, and I will also be bringing up slides occasionally as we go throughout our presentation. So as I'm pulling up some slides, I want to jump in with our first question, which is for all three of our presenters. And I'd love to hear and for you to share with the audience a little bit about what brings you to this conversation. Why is the issue of homelessness, especially experienced by families, one that you are passionate about?
I can start us off. So hi, everyone. So as Katie mentioned, my research interests have broadly centered on issues related to poverty and inequality in the United States. And given that we're living in one of the richest countries in the world, the problem of homelessness to me is kind of a sad reflection of the existing inequalities in our society. And homelessness in particular is a major social issue in my part of the world, in LA County, and really stands in stark contrast to kind of the celebrity culture and glitz of Los Angeles. And Los Angeles and LA County has in fact seen a major surge in homelessness in the past couple of years, fueled by various factors such as high housing costs and shortage of affordable housing, to just name a few that we will talk more about. And we are likely to see this problem of homelessness worsen as a result of the pandemic-related economic hardships. So housing is more important than ever in the COVID environment. So which is why we were drawn to this issue of homelessness for our research project. And we were also particularly interested in focusing on homeless families in our research because we wanted to draw attention to this subgroup within the larger homeless population that tends to be more hidden in society and seems to slip through the cracks. So we look forward to talking more about our research focusing on families experiencing homelessness as part of this workshop presentation.
Hi everyone, I'm Danny. I'm a Bachelor of Social Work student from Mississippi Pacific. And for me, I was really guided by the perceptions and stereotypes that I see that exist here in the US that perpetuate this idea that all homeless individuals and families are filled with negligence or laziness, substance use, and mental illness. And I heard this quite often growing up until present day. And while I'm not saying that some of these factors do not exist within the homeless population, they do not represent the narrative of all individuals or families who do experience homelessness in our country. There are many unique ways that families end up homeless. Many Americans in the United States today are living paycheck to paycheck. They may be entirely dependent on their full-time minimum wage income just to pay their rent and hopefully put food on the table. And now it's important to consider the amount of high stress and instability families experience when they are at risk of becoming homeless. That in itself can lead to other risk factors that perpetuate this cycle of homelessness. The lack of appropriate childcare available to parents may also really hinder a parent's ability to find another full-time job that aligns with their work schedule. And this is just one of many examples of the unique scenarios in which a family could end up experiencing homelessness throughout their lifetime. We also really need to acknowledge that unexpected expenses, layoffs, evictions, low socioeconomic status could be contributing factors to homelessness. While all these factors vary and are very complex, we should also acknowledge that domestic violence, poor mental and physical health conditions may also be the leading factor contributing to homelessness. For me, personally, why I'm passionate about this issue of homelessness and addressing it is I really want to make an impact in changing this narrative of the perceptions and attitudes of society that they have towards families who are experiencing chronic homelessness. I believe every individual experiencing hardship has their unique story. I don't believe someone's shortcomings or their current circumstances, disabilities, or past mistakes should be a determining factor in their ability to receive a roof over their head or the critical support that they may need to thrive.
I think you both did a pretty good job summarizing. I would like to echo all or most of those things. I would say for me, the reason I'm passionate about the field of homelessness and working in this field is really boils down to a core belief that housing is a human right, that it doesn't matter if you made bad decisions. It doesn't matter if you're experiencing addiction or mental health issues or whatnot. Housing is a human right. It's a place to call home. It's a place to be safe. It's a place that is stable, that I think should be afforded to all people. And so I would say that is the core of why I chose to be involved in this work. And I think in being involved in this work, I've come to see, which I think we will cover a little bit later through the research, like housing has direct correlations to effects on people's education, their economic mobility, folks' health disparities that we see and how it disproportionately affects people who are experiencing homelessness. So it's part of this larger issue. And so as a macro social worker, I see housing and providing housing and making sure there's stable housing for everyone as part of a solution to not just solving homelessness, but really solving some of other societal issues, including poverty and access to healthcare and things like that. So but yeah, I would say the core of it is this belief that all people deserve a right to call a place home.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to quickly pull up the slides here just for folks to see. So I just want to say a word about the research itself. So I mentioned the Hatfield Prize at the beginning, and this is an opportunity for student faculty teams from Christian colleges or universities to dive into a domestic social policy in their local community. So recognizing that so much of what happens, from a policy perspective, from a practice perspective, is happening in our local communities. And it's really important that we understand the challenges our neighbors are facing, as well as the key stakeholders or institutions that are involved in addressing some of these challenges. So Danny and Dr. Jacob throughout the last year have spent time researching the issue of homelessness, specifically looking at the impact on families with young children, and examine a model, among others, but a promising model called permanent supportive housing that we're going to spend time talking about in a little bit. So with that, I have a couple questions that first we'll get at kind of an explanation of the issue so we can understand a little bit about what makes chronic family homelessness unique. And then after that, we're going to pivot and look to some solutions, including permanent supportive housing, both the things that are promising as well as concerns that folks may have of different aspects, and how in Danny and Dr. Jacobs' research, they recommend strengthening the model. So my first question along these lines, I'm going to have Danny tell us a little bit about what is family homelessness. I think there's lots of definitions that people may have in mind, but I'd love for you first to just share with us what it is, what the difference between short-term and chronic homelessness is, and why that distinction is important.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to begin by describing, well, what is a family according to our Federal Homeless Service Initiative. So according to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, which federally serves homeless individuals and funds housing and services, a family is defined as a group of individuals living with or without children, seeking assistance together as a family. For purposes of our Dr. Jacob and I's research, we focused on families with young children, as the typical homeless family in America is made up of a single mother and her 2 young children. And so family homelessness defined by HUD is the lack of a fixed, regular, adequate nighttime residence, or living in a place that's not suitable for human habitation. So like a car, the streets, somewhere within a forestry area, or living in a publicly or privately operated shelter. So this could be any form of temporary living arrangement. This may include emergency shelters, transitional housing, hotel or motels, and any of these can be funded. Any temporary form of assistance for housing can be funded by federal, state, local, or private programs here in the US. And so going into defining the difference between short-term and chronic homelessness, it's important to know that both families can experience short-term or chronic. And so short-term homelessness is described as a brief period of homelessness that may be due to factors such as eviction or something immediate like a loss of employment that was unexpected, or a natural disaster. And when we're looking at chronic homelessness, according to HUD, chronic homelessness is when an individual or family experiences homelessness for at least 1 year, or 3 episodes of homelessness within 1 year. And this is usually also accompanied by qualifying physical disability, substance use disorder, or a mental health diagnosis. And it's important to know that sometimes these qualified mental health diagnoses would be considered disorders such as bipolar II disorder or schizoaffective disorder, both of which are considered in the severe mental illness category of qualifying mental illness when we're defining that. And this distinction matters when we are thinking about addressing homelessness. As a family's homeless status will determine what type of housing support or supportive services that they may even qualify for. So families who get left out of this receiving services such as housing support are those who are not considered chronically homeless and do not meet the disability criteria. There's certain services that they may not qualify for, such as permanent supportive housing, or those who are living within doubled up households. Doubled up households would refer to when a family or an individual lives with another family or individual within their household. So this can be multiple families, 2 or more living within one unit. This could be a 1-bedroom unit. There isn't a limit, but that gives you an idea of what doubled up housing would consist of. And so it's very important to consider because there's an entire hidden and invisible group of homeless families who lack this housing stability or are dependent on their friends or family for housing. And this in itself does not promote family flourishing or stability.
Thanks, Danny. I'm going to take us off the PowerPoint here for a second. And Psalms, I'm going to turn to you, and I'd love if you could share with us kind of the factors that contribute to what Danny just described of chronic family homelessness. Based on your practice experience, kind of what have you seen as some of the main or key factors that contribute to this?
Yeah, I think when you're working with people are always complex. And so I think anybody who's worked in the field of homelessness can acknowledge that there are multiple factors and complex factors that play into what brings a family or an individual to experiencing homelessness. I do think that a lot of them could be boiled down to the lack of stability and a lack of support. So whether it is lack of financial stability, lack of familial support, job stability, whatever it is, mental health stability, whatever it may be, I think most causes of homelessness boil down to some form of instability and lack of support. For us specifically, we serve women and children only at Marion House. So I do want to say that this perception and perspective is specifically just for regarding women and children. And what we see a lot in our residents is a lot of them have some form of history of trauma, whether that's domestic violence, whether it's generational experience of foster care or homelessness. A lot of most, if not all of the women that we serve have some sort of history of trauma, in addition to the fact that homelessness itself is a form of traumatic experience. And so, that's a form of instability. I know there's a lot of misnomers and myths about all homeless people having, all individuals experiencing homelessness having some form of mental illness or a drug addiction or whatever it may be. But I feel like that's also just difficult to pinpoint because it's kind of like, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Like, it's very probable that the traumatic experience of homelessness can exhibit and manifest and develop some mental health issues. It can drive a person to use substances to cope. So while there are instances where one causes the other, I think that also gets pretty blurry. And I think that that's why complex solutions are needed, is because there are complex causes to homelessness. There's a bunch of myths about, I've heard people say, like, well, the folks on the street, like, they don't even want help. But I will tell you that our waiting list will tell you that is not the truth. Otherwise, we wouldn't have to turn people away because we are full. And so I think, there's this recognition of the complex nature of homelessness. And I think also once one of those factors is triggered, it's very easy for the dominoes to fall into place, right? So if you lose your job and that makes you financially unstable, that could trigger mental health episode. It could trigger, I think it's difficult to say, like, this thing directly caused homelessness. I think it is a little bit of a domino effect, but also a little bit of, I wouldn't say muddy, but just this complex web of different factors that all contribute to somebody eventually losing their home. And which also just makes it that more difficult to get out of, because you don't just get out of homelessness by getting a job. You don't just get out of homelessness by being sober, if that, and so it is pretty complex, and that is what makes it challenging and exciting. I will say that. But yeah, based on our experience, we've seen just like a lot of history of trauma with the residents that we've served.
Thanks, Psalms. Dr. Jacob, we're going to turn to you now to tell us and share a little bit about the impact that chronic homelessness has on children and families. In your research, you both looked at things like educational outcomes, health outcomes, economic mobility. So could you just share a little bit about what we know in regards to the impact on those experiencing homelessness?
Sure. So just like Sam said, the impacts of chronic homelessness on parents and children of families experiencing homelessness are also pretty complex and multifaceted. But based on our research, I'm just going to highlight a few of the key ways in which homelessness impacts health and educational outcomes, as well as long-term economic mobility. So in terms of health outcomes, it probably comes as no surprise that homelessness affects both the physical and mental health of families. Research has shown that depression, for example, is very common among homeless mothers, along with, say, higher rates of post-traumatic stress disorder compared to the general female population. Research has found that homeless fathers experience greater risk of psychological distress because of the challenges they face in providing for their families. And then the most vulnerable members or children in these families have been shown to experience high rates of poor chronic health, developmental disabilities, and behavioral and emotional problems. So children in homeless families also have been shown to have more difficulty with internalizing behaviors such as anxiety and somatic complaints. And research has shown that when children internalize their behavior, they're at much greater risk of developing psychological disorders, suicidal behavior, and other behavioral problems even within adulthood. In terms of educational outcomes, starting with the children, it comes as no surprise again that students would struggle to focus at school when they don't know where they will sleep that night. Children experiencing homelessness are far more likely to be chronically absent or change schools frequently, which disrupts their learning. Studies have shown that across age levels, homelessness impacts children's academic achievement, including things like their reading, spelling, math scores, which are often below grade level compared to their housed peers. And then adults within homeless families also tend to have lower educational attainment and job skills, making it harder to secure a stable and more secure employment. So which then affects a family's long-term prospects for upward economic mobility. So housing, we know, plays a critical role in the lives of families, and not having a stable home can affect parents' ability to find a job, gain job skills, meet educational goals, all factors like Sam's mentioned that then contribute to or hinder their ability to secure jobs with, say, more stable income to meet their family's needs. And these families that end up living paycheck to paycheck with extremely limited, if any, savings, then are at even greater risk of losing their income when they experience unexpected financial setbacks, say from job loss or expenses that force them to choose between, if at all they're able to get a home, pay rent and like put food on the table, or healthcare needs. Housing, we know, has also been nationally recognized as a means of accumulating wealth. So not having a stable, affordable home negatively impacts a family's ability to build wealth or move up the economic ladder over time, and thus also contributes to generational poverty experienced by many vulnerable families who have in particular experienced homelessness. And I think the research shows that children who have experienced homelessness often are at also risk of experiencing it themselves in adulthood. So, in short, homelessness kind of undermines not only a family's ability to flourish, as they lack the stability, like as Sans mentioned. That instability and inability to have a safe, stable place to grow, to engage with each other and flourish, also hinders their ability to engage with and contribute to their local communities. So impacts are varied and on several different fronts, but these are some of the main ones.
Thank you. We're going to turn to thinking about how we, you know, as a society might begin to address family homelessness. And I'm going to share again the slides just to give you a sense of where we're headed. So we're going to spend most of our time talking about the permanent supportive housing model, which is what Danny and Dr. Jacobs spent most of their time researching in the LA County area. And there's some important things to note just in terms of the model or the tradition that permanent supportive housing comes out of. And then we're going to spend some time talking about what permanent supportive housing is, what it entails, what it looks like for families. And then we will spend a little bit of time just talking about the impact that COVID-19 has had on families experiencing homelessness. Danny and Dr. Jacobs' research did not have the opportunity to dig into that because it was occurring simultaneously with kind of the onset of COVID. But we will spend some time, now that there is more data available, just briefly discussing the impact of COVID. So Dr. Jacob, we're gonna come back to you and talk briefly about the different schools of thought in kind of the field regarding solutions to homelessness. And kind of two of the main ones are what's sometimes called a linear model, which I'll let you explain, versus a housing first model. And so if you could just briefly explain what those are and then where permanent supportive housing fits within that, that'd be a good place for us to start.
And are we sharing that screen? Do we,
yep, I can
the figure? I think it would be helpful to have that. So I can try to give like a big picture, and then if Danny and Sams want to add to that from their experience in the field, they can add to that. So hopefully if you're seeing the figure, the linear model, the idea was that before a client or a family can receive permanent housing, they must participate in some form of treatment program to either obtain sobriety or to receive mental health treatment to regulate their mental health diagnoses. So they must, in a way, prove they're ready for permanent housing, and the level of independence would increase as they move through. So if you can see the staircase model, you know, they work their way up in the types of housing that they have available to them. And each step is intended to make them more ready and show that they're capable of managing in a permanent housing environment, or in prep for permanent housing rather. So again, the idea here is that work your way up here, prove that you've gone through the training, show that you've attained a certain level of sobriety or made progress in terms of your mental health treatment. The housing first model is, the idea is, I would say maybe flipped, in the sense that they're saying, you know, a stable home should come first. So if take care of housing, and then people can take care of their other needs. So they're saying that if once people or individuals or families are able to secure or receive permanent housing, that will support their ability to participate in treatment programs, meet treatment goals, without having to worry about the housing aspect. And then permanent housing, our permanent housing supportive model, it is the idea that, you know, these individuals or families need more than just a house. So going back to even what Sam said, or what I talked about earlier in terms of factors contributing to homelessness and the impact of homelessness, many of them need more than a house. They have so many other things going on that they may need supportive services for. And the idea is, with permanent supportive housing, is that housing is taken care of, and then they're linked with supportive services that they might need in order for them to be able to maintain and keep their permanent housing. So I don't know if Danny or Sams, you want to add anything to that distinction.
Okay. That was really helpful. Thank you. I think we'll turn now to Danny, who is going to explain a little bit, now that we have that kind of understanding of where permanent supportive housing fits. Danny, we'd love for you to share what permanent supportive housing is. If you could just talk about how it works, who is eligible, types of services provided.
Of course, Katie. So we have found permanent supportive housing to be a promising model for addressing family homelessness. Permanent supportive housing is a permanent and affordable housing accompanied by supportive services, where tenants would typically pay up to a maximum of 30% of their income towards their rent. And the remaining balance of rent is paid through either a rental subsidy or a housing voucher. Currently, individuals and families who have the qualifying disability or are experiencing chronic homelessness under HUD's definition are eligible for permanent supportive housing. However, permanent supportive housing must prioritize chronically homeless individuals with the longest history of homelessness and the most severe service need due to the lack of permanent supportive housing development that does exist currently. So, although there is no time limit for families, the goal of this program is to ultimately help families move towards a greater degree of independence and stability. For example, lowering supportive service utilization over time, and increasing their ability to maintain their permanent housing on their own within their family unit. The supportive services aspect of permanent supportive housing that is offered typically ranges from mental health treatment, healthcare services, support groups, life skill trainings, employment services to help our families become job ready. These supportive services are just a few offered that really help our tenants maintain housing stability and promote independence. Services that are offered are either provided on site, so they could be provided at the permanent supportive housing development location itself, or they're provided off-site through government programs, community-based organizations, or faith-based organizations as well, or churches and congregations.
Thanks, Danny. We're going to come back in a little bit to talking more about kind of Danny and Dr. Jacobs' recommendations in the report about how the model might even be strengthened and tailored more specifically for families with young children. But Psalms, because you have kind of experience in this field, the Marion House, provides supportive housing. Wondered if you could share with us kind of your perspective and based on your experience as a social worker, how you've seen it in your own work and organization, how permanent supportive housing is working or not, what you found so far in your experience.
Yeah, I think when we were talking about causes of homelessness, I mentioned that the cause of experiencing homelessness is lack of stability and support. So kind of the flip side of that, I think the reason that a permanent supportive housing model works is because it does have that stability and that support. I actually had in a conversation with one of our residents just last week, we were interviewing her for something, but something that she said I think is pertinent to the conversation. And she said that once she was here in our program and she was somewhere where she knew she wasn't only going to be there for 30, 60, 90 days, or even, some shelters are just overnight shelters. So once she was in a place where she knew she was going to be here for a little bit longer, where she didn't have to worry about where she was going to go in 30, 60, 90 days, she finally felt that stability where when she didn't have to think about where she was going to sleep that night, she was able to focus on other things that she needed to do to make sure that she can, achieve and maintain housing. Because I think sometimes we can be successful in getting folks out of homelessness, but then we also have to be there to help them maintain their housing and their newfound stability. Because there are some programs where those services and that support stops once you reach a certain milestone. But I think it's really important to think about a model like this one where while the goal is to eventually move out of this this kind of program, it's not going to go away just because you are now employed. One, because employment alone can't pull people out of homelessness. I think obviously the wages and the salaries at which people are employed is definitely a big factor. The National Low Income Housing Coalition, they just released a report this year that showed that for Maryland, the fair market rate of a 2-bedroom apartment is like a person needs to be making at least $28 an hour to be able to afford it. And in Maryland, where the minimum wage right now, I believe, is $11, like a person needs to work over 100 hours a week to even make rent, right? And so we have households and families who are severely cost burdened, even though they're working, right? They're at risk of homelessness, even though they have all the things they're supposed to have to not be at risk of homelessness or to get out of homelessness, right? They have a job, but is that job paying paying the wage they need to be able to maintain their housing? So having a model like the permanent supportive housing model, where we're saying like, hey, you're not going to have to pay whatever the average two-bedroom market rent here. We're basing your rent off of up to 30% of what you are making. It's a much more affordable way for them to achieve and maintain housing. But it also allows folks to not be so cost burdened, right? Like if you have to choose between paying rent or paying for your medication, for paying rent or paying for your kids' books to go to school, right? Like these are some of the decisions that families constantly have to make. And so in a model like the permanent supportive housing model, they're being relieved of some of that burden, where they don't have to choose between keeping a roof overhead versus food on the table or whatever it is that they might need. So this model works because it allows families to have a stable footing and a stable and supportive environment with the supportive services that is meant to be provided in this model. Families have the support they need, hopefully, to be able to not just achieve housing and economic mobility, but to actually maintain that once they have it.
Great. Thank you, Psalms. And that, I think, is a good kind of transition for us to talk about the model in the way that it functions best, which I think Danny and Dr. Jacob found in their research would be when there are kind of robust partnerships in the community. And thinking about families as complex and varied, we know that human beings have physical, emotional, spiritual needs that aren't necessarily all going to be met by, say, government or by, say, the church alone, faith-based organizations alone. So part of Danny's research really looked at the relationship between government and faith-based organizations, nonprofit community-based organizations, schools, the public school district, and really sought to understand how these are working together when it comes to a model like permanent supportive housing. So Danny, I'm going to turn it back to you just to share a little bit about that piece of partnership and what you found that looked like in the LA County context or elsewhere.
Yeah, definitely. Dr. Jacob, feel free to add to this as well if I left anything out. So the federal government in itself really has the ability to provide these funding initiatives and significant support for homeless families and the organizations that are dedicated to serving them. HUD actually provides funding to both state and local government, including various nonprofit orgs that serve these homeless families. And as you were mentioning earlier, Katie, although government has the ability to provide funding for an affordable permanent roof over a family's head, these community-based and faith-based organizations are really best equipped to meet these mental, emotional, and social spiritual needs that are unique to these parents, children, and families that are interacting with these organizations, probably on a daily basis, and sometimes even on a timely basis, could be weekly as well. So going specifically to faith-based organizations, they could essentially collaborate in the provision of supportive services by really providing things like recovery and rehabilitative care through these homeless ministries that they may have already established within their org, and connecting our homeless families with church congregations who have the ability to provide these supportive services such as job skill training, employment assistance, and really one of the most important family-centered services, access to affordable childcare, which would provide long-term stability for a family who is in need of looking for a job or really having that safe haven for the child to be amongst the parents' search or at any form of time that they're trying to maintain and develop this independence. And it's great that churches are providing these things such as food and clothing and hygiene kits as temporary relief. But we really looked at what we want, we hope to see church congregations doing within their homeless ministries, where there's a lot of different talent amongst the congregation that can be used to help these families in need. And so in our research and talking to some organizations, there's actually community-based organizations who have built permanent supportive housing units to address the lack of affordable housing within their specific area in LA County. And they've actually partnered with landlords, property managers, and developers as well to identify these affordable options for families that they may need to receive. So essentially, both government and civil society partnership is very important in the successful implementation of the permanent supportive housing model.
Thanks, Danny. Next question, Dr. Jacob or Danny can feel free to chime in. But in your research, you make recommendations for how the permanent supportive housing model can be strengthened in ways that better support specifically families with young children. So can you share a little bit about what those recommendations were, specifically around things like eligibility criteria, as well as family-centered services?
Sure. So I think I can start off and talk a little bit about the eligibility criteria, and then maybe Danny can talk about the supportive services and tie it in with what he said earlier. So as we mentioned earlier, currently to receive permanent supportive housing, HUD requires that the head of the household should be experiencing chronic homelessness and have a qualifying disability. So while the permanent supportive housing model serves many families, we felt that the current model leaves out families living in doubled housing, which, as we mentioned earlier, are those who really have no stable home of their own or no home of their own, but end up living with friends or other family members, or essentially doubled up with other families because they lack a home of their own. And we know that doubled up housing arrangements have been shown to cause psychological distress, interpersonal tension, and also a lot of adverse effects on children's social and emotional development. However, these doubled up families often remain a very hidden group experiencing homelessness based on HUD's current eligibility criteria. So one of our recommendations is for HUD to consider reevaluating and expanding the permanent supportive housing eligibility criteria to include families that have lived in unstable housing that we consider doubled up housing to be for at least 1 year or 3 or more times in a given year because of their inability to secure independent affordable housing. So again, we feel by expanding the eligibility criteria, we're reaching, hopefully can reach families who may not have those qualifying disability or other, the criteria that we normally are going with. And there's this whole group of families that could really benefit from a permanent supportive home, but are unable to get access to it because they don't meet these criteria. So that's one of our recommendations, to consider expanding those eligibility criteria.
Yeah, and in addition to what Jacob was saying, expanding our eligibility criteria to include these doubled up families, family-centered services are what we really wanted to emphasize within our research, as typically permanent supportive housing is geared towards our individuals with disabilities and not so much family geared. So in addition to in addition to this, the supportive services should focus on both the parent and child's needs within the family unit. Needs should be addressed, like adequate childcare, as mentioned earlier, essential life skills, training and development that really promote that independence amongst the family. Budgeting, as a family enters a new life from homelessness and or has former history of being able to budget, an increase in this opportunity to build these budgeting skills is necessary for financial flourishing. And parenting groups should also be offered. I wanted to emphasize as well mentorship opportunities between children and other opportunities like with children in something connected to a school district or some form of mentorship opportunity that could be offered to really improve the psychosocial effects of homelessness on children and to help alleviate any potential stressors that may have come about from previously experiencing this homelessness. Same going for parents as well, and coordinated case management aimed at nurturing family flourishing and well-being. So really having that coordinated case manager to be there to increase potential collaboration with these community-based organizations and faith-based organizations that may be in the community that the family may not be aware of, or they just need that middleman, that connection to help get them connected to those services that they're in high need of. So these services themselves that come from these community-based organizations and these faith-based organizations may actually have established relationships of trust with these families that are within their communities, right? These families may be more willing to participate in and receive services with organizations and places of worship where the services provided are actually built on the relationships of trust that have been made between the family unit and that specific community-based organization or faith-based organization that they may be barely establishing that trust relationship with or have had it for a very long time. So it's important that we take those resources are utilized so that families feel more comfortable in their vulnerable state of formerly experiencing homelessness as they enter into the permanent supportive housing model.
Thanks, Danny. So we're gonna, as I mentioned, just chat briefly about our current moment and recognizing the impact of COVID-19 on families and especially families who are experiencing homelessness. And I think this connects with, I don't know that it's been explicitly mentioned yet, but also looking at who is experiencing family homelessness. We know that there are significant racial disparities, and I think that aligns with what we're seeing in terms of the impact of COVID-19 on families who is impacted. Communities of color are being hit hardest by both the financial and health impacts of COVID. So I think, Psalms, if you'd be willing to share a little bit about what you've seen so far, how COVID has shifted services like permanent supportive housing, how things have had to adjust, and then kind of what you anticipate or forecast in terms of the ongoing impacts of COVID-19 and the economic crisis that we're in on families who are either currently experiencing homelessness or kind of in a precarious position now.
Yeah, Marrying House provides permanent housing and also transitional housing. So I've kind of seen COVID affect them differently. The perk of the permanent supportive housing program is they are living in their own home. And so the intake process for them wasn't that affected because we could just move them straight into their home, ask them to quarantine there and be fine. I know other types of homeless services programs do struggle with, balancing. You don't want an individual to stay homeless because they are more at risk in out on the street or in congregate living, but at the same time you have to protect the residents you already have and making sure you're not bringing an unknown what we don't know when residents come to us whether or not they're asymptomatic or not at all. And so that definitely threw us for a loop the first couple of months of COVID, just trying to figure out how do we balance making sure that we're able to continue services and making sure that we're able to house folks, because we don't want units sitting empty when we know there's somebody out there who can be in them. So that was kind of a very difficult balance in the beginning. we do serve a lot of individuals who are experiencing or have history of substance use. So we've seen an increase in relapse rates since the pandemic. I think, you know, with staff working off-site and working from home, there's less staff presence and face-to-face interaction. So I feel like that contributes to it, as well as, you know, just the difficulty of obviously trying to cope with all the unknowns that come with this pandemic. In Baltimore City, we being the kind of coalition of all of the homeless services and the mayor's office of homelessness, they definitely took an approach of no barriers to housing during COVID. So they weren't testing folks coming into new programs, not because we don't want folks to be safe who are already in the program, but because we don't want that to be a barrier. So we really worked, there's a strong partnership with the health department in getting folks tested as soon as possible, obviously coming up with quarantining procedures, especially in transitional congregate living facilities, those types of homeless programs. How do you quarantine somebody when, you know, some programs, their rooming situation is multiple bunk beds in one larger room. And so how do you develop a quarantine plan safely for all of those people involved? So that was kind of the big shift that I feel like most agencies were feeling in the beginning. I think in terms of immediate, but also long-term long-term effects of the pandemic, I think we have yet to know the full breadth of how this is affecting us. A lot of the people that we serve, unfortunately, are not working jobs that you could technically just work from home. They're the frontline workers. They're the ones who might be the cashier at the grocery store. They're the ones who are working in the hospital as a CNA or as a nutritional assistant. So those jobs are essential and are in the front lines and are at higher risk of exposure. So then balancing that, especially for our families who the mom has to go into work, but their 5-year-old is just starting school, and so online learning has been a struggle for our families as well, partly because there is a lack of daycare now because of COVID, and then also just the scheduling of it all. Often it feels like they're trying to balance their own work schedules with then the online learning schedules of their children as well. And so that's been a struggle, as well as I think just the mental health impact that probably most of us are experiencing. I know a lot of people are experiencing increased anxiety and increased depression and isolation, and so all of those factors that I know probably is true for the rest of the world also experiencing the pandemic, but I think especially for families who are experiencing homelessness, it's another added layer of uncertainty and instability. And so that has been like some of the more immediate factors. I will say, like, us as an organization, in terms of like funding, we receive funding from all different places, from foundations, from the government and things like that. And at this time of the recording, like, we haven't gotten some of our renewed contracts for some of our funding. And so that worries us, because we don't know, did the state spend money on some, like on COVID related things, but then now will they have money for the programs they've previously been funding? So obviously those are all things we don't know the answer to, that we're only like left to speculate on, and we won't know until we get there. But those are some of kind of the uncertainties and effects that we're seeing right now.
Thank you. So our last question, we're just gonna pivot a little bit, more of almost a personal reflection question for Danny and Dr. Jacob, who have just wrapped up, close to a year's worth of research and writing for this report. So you conducted original research in your community, lots of interviews with leaders, with public officials, nonprofits. So I would love for you both to share a little bit about either what surprised you in your research, or perhaps what made you hopeful, and kind of how you hope to continue to engage this issue or further your research in this area.
Yeah, definitely.
You want me to start off, Danny?
If you'd like.
Okay. So I can start off, and then Danny can add to whatever I have to say. So interestingly, just hearing Sam's mention about like permanent supportive housing and how people, you know, can be at least placed within their own home. So yesterday I had the opportunity to join a webinar hosted by the Congressional Progressive Caucus Center, and they were doing it about COVID-19 and the housing crisis. And so one of the speakers was talking about how housing has essentially turned into almost like a cure or vaccine for COVID, that in order to protect our communities, our local communities. And I thought that was, you know, that's pretty powerful, because we're saying that we need to keep our community safe by keeping people housed. And then we're talking about a group of people that are even more vulnerable with either no housing or living on the street or transitional housing, speaking to what Sam's mentioned also. So really just emphasized for me how important it is to focus on this group, and especially families who are at risk of, you know, either losing their jobs or at risk for homelessness, even in the COVID environment, sorry. I think as we were talking to people and key stakeholders in our local environment, we were really struck by how much funding is an issue for permanent supportive housing. In Azusa, where we are based, there are currently no permanent supportive housing developments, even though you know, there are a number of families experiencing homelessness. In our conversations with the Azusa Unified School District, she mentioned that there are a large number of families who are living doubled up or who are at risk of homelessness. And I think Danny mentioned this earlier as well, that they're able to offer very limited motel vouchers. And even then it's hard to qualify, and what happens when, you know, that voucher runs out and you have nowhere to go. So in the school setting, you know, because it's self-reported, there might be families who are not reporting their needs. So these numbers of families who are either experiencing homelessness or at risk for homelessness may be much, much higher than we are even fully aware of. You know, affordable housing is not unknown in LA County or in our part of the world. You know, housing is a huge issue. The rising costs of housing are well known in LA County. And right now, permanent supportive housing is geared more towards individuals that meet the HUD criteria for chronic homelessness along with a qualifying disability. But it's very, very difficult for families to obtain permanent and affordable housing. So I think it just made us realize how much this topic needs more attention, and especially how do we draw more attention to the needs of families, especially those who may not meet all the current HUD requirements but are equally vulnerable or at risk. So I'll stop there, and then maybe Danny can talk about how else we hope to be engaged.
Yeah, so really want to echo what Dr. Jacobs said, just the lack of funding initiatives within the city of Azusa itself and across LA County for permanent supportive housing or any housing, affordable housing specifically, it really struck me to know that, you know, the district itself is actually the entity that provides homeless services and housing support to members of the community. So, you know, I thought to myself, what happens to the families who aren't enrolled within the school district? Where do they go for these already limited services that the district has done their best to provide in terms of short-term relief, like hygiene, food, as we discussed earlier, healthcare clinics, or clothing, clothing giveaways. But, you know, aside from that, there's a very limited budget, but a huge desire from the community to support the families that are in need. And so it almost comes down to one specific individual within the school district herself to make her way to figure out what are some options that I can receive from the community, partnerships that I can make to establish this housing for families who, you know, may need it, even if it's just a week or two of a motel voucher usage one time. You know, we come to find that that's actually very difficult to obtain. And so I think we be a little bit more, I feel like there needs to be, I need to figure out, I want to figure out in my future research, like what way can we see government focus in on these local communities and spreading funding throughout county initiatives, state initiatives to trickle down to really support these communities that are in need, that are struggling to provide the limited resources that they already have. And just learning from, you know, our former city mayor that unaccompanied minors due to family homelessness is very common amongst the community. For me, that was actually very heartbreaking to hear, especially being this is a native myself and growing up in this community and not being really fully aware that this is something that's happening right in my backyard, but, you know, I'm not even aware of it. And something like permanent supportive housing could really be a promising model to help provide these services to these children and parents who are in need of figuring out, like, how do I get, you know, back on my feet? How do I get my life back together? How do I do so with my children alongside me? And so that's something that I really hope to see in the future and engage in is, you know, determining what does housing support look like for these homeless families in our community, so they don't end up homeless, as Dr. Jacob was saying earlier. And just, you know, how can we draw more attention to the needs of families, especially those who don't meet all the current HUD requirements? I think, you know, when we consider these doubled up households, they're really a group of families who may only be in this doubled up household for a week or two and then transition into another home. And it's a consistent battle of trying to maintain that stability. How do we reach those families? How do we get a hold of those families and, you know, count them amongst this point in time count that we have for our homeless families every year, so that we're able to provide this support, right? And right now, permanent supportive housing being the permanent solution, but how can we, you know, begin to at least work towards that goal, funding-wise and just, you know, organizational-wise, like being able to connect to them. So figuring out what our next goal towards figuring out how that looks and what that looks like for our future research is something I'm really excited to engage in, especially here in the city of Azusa, doing more collaborative work, hopefully with the city and determining what can I do, and as a resident, to support my local community in addressing family homelessness and homelessness overall.
I think tied to what Danny just said, another thing that came up over and over again is, like, we know there's a need for more permanent supportive housing developments. And if you just talk to an average community member, they're not going to tell you that we don't want families to thrive or we don't want them to have a stable home. But the moment you talk about permanent supportive housing units or developments within the local community, the not in my backyard syndrome kind of kicks in, and there's a lot of pushback from community members. So Danny and I, you know, have been thinking about how do we address those concerns, or like, how do you change community perceptions about, you know, it goes back to those stereotypes or perceptions we have about homeless families. They're all A, B, or C, but how do we view them just as, you know, individuals who hit a hard spot in life and need a little bit of help, and how can permanent supportive housing maybe play a role in getting them back on their feet again? And even the children with those families, because I think sometimes we focus on the adults, and we are so quick to blame and say, well, they got into it, or they should have done A, B, or C. But if we think about the children within those families, and we think it's not just the parents, it's the children, the whole family unit, how do we support them, walk alongside them, and kind of so that they can be independent and self-sufficient. So that's another thing that came up over and over again in our conversations with the community-based organizations, the faith-based organizations that we talked to, in terms of sometimes the community resistance to that. And so we're thinking about ways in which we can, you know, maybe promote more awareness about what permanent supportive housing is. Why is that valuable? While recognizing, you know, obviously permanent supportive housing has its challenges and it's not a flawless model, but like, why might it be helpful to these vulnerable families?
Thank you both. That was really powerful and I think really important points that you both made. And I think, you know, in closing, just to bring us back to our faith, and as people of faith who believe that every person is created in the image of God, that we all bear human dignity, I think Danny and Dr. Jacobs' research does a lot to explore how we can honor the dignity of our neighbors, how, you know, the experience of homelessness really degrades that dignity that we all possess. So their research really sheds light, I think, on the importance of addressing this in our community. And Danny, I love what you said about, especially this being your own hometown, of learning, educating, understanding what's going on, but then moving to action of how do we address this through policy at a local level or through initiatives at our churches, our schools, nonprofit. How do we support nonprofit organizations like Marian House who are doing this work? So I just want to express my gratitude to the three of you who have just really helped, I hope, to educate our viewers on this issue and how they might begin to engage. Very quickly, I'll just bring up the slides once more to show you where you can find information about Danny's research. You can read the whole report by going to our website there. And if you would like to connect with any of our panelists or presenters to learn more or talk more about the research or this issue, you can reach out to me and I can make that connection for you. So with that, we thank you for being a part of our workshop today. We wish we were with you all in person, but thank you for attending.